Okay, so before us today we have a random smattering of vintage computer parts. Now these actually all came together as part of a lot from an sailor on eBay, and it was my understanding it came from the estate of an engineer. Yeah, it had a fairly reasonable buy it now, so I went for it. And I was really excited about some parts of it for sure, some more than others, but yeah, it turned out to be a really great lot. In particular, I was interested in the digital group stuff. Digital group is a big thing for me. I've done a documentary video on the company, and I just find their products and their story really interesting as one of the pioneering computer companies of the mid-70s. So yeah, there were just some odds and ends that I didn't have, and I was excited about those, and then some other things that looked really interesting to me. So I went and I shipped all of this stuff to my freight forwarder in the US because the seller didn't ship to Canada, and that's normal for me. Unfortunately, most US sellers are like that. And yeah, it went there, and then it went a little bit AWOL. We don't really know what happened. Usually the way it works with these freight forwarders is you buy stuff and they have a box for you, and basically everything accumulates there, and then what you can do is you can ship it combined, so that you can combine multiple shipments together, and they'll repack everything so that it saves shipping on the way up. And yeah, so I shipped this as part of a lot with some other stuff, and everything seemed to be fine. And then I checked in, I think it was about a day or two later, just to check the history and make sure everything went all right and that I had a tracking number. And this lot, which was together in one box, had a cryptic little note beside it, and it said, reviewing package location. So that's usually a sign that something definitely has gone wrong. I kind of figured a better way of saying that was we lost it. And yeah, so I reached out to the company, and yeah, that was a real mess. I'm somewhat sympathetic to these companies because, COVID really messed them up. It took down the number of workers that they had available, and at the same time, there was a massive increase in the amount of stuff being shipped and sold online. So definitely I'm sympathetic to that, but I literally could not reach these guys for 2 weeks. They just wouldn't answer their phones, they wouldn't answer their messages, nothing. And so finally I did get somebody, and they said, yeah, we're looking for it. And that went on for about 3 more weeks, and eventually they said, nope, sorry, we don't know where it went. It probably got shipped to the wrong place, or we just don't know. So that was a bummer. Now, the way these freight forwarders work is they do cover the value of the items up to a certain amount, and thankfully I was well within that amount. So I just filed a claim and they paid it out. And that was the last that I thought of these things. And, I was glad I got the money back, but, looking at this stuff here, you can see some of the stuff is not replaceable, right? It's not about the money, it's about what it is. So, yeah, I was kind of bummed out about that for quite a while. But then I was just getting around to forgetting about it. It was probably about 6 months later. And I'm going to ship another batch of stuff because I'm starting to clear out my box. I'm not really having confidence with these guys. And yeah, it just sort of showed up there. It showed up in the list, and I was like, looking through the pictures, and I'm like, I've seen this before. What is this stuff? And then I finally remembered what it was. And I was like, oh my God, this is the box. This is it. This is the one that went missing. So I just ticked it off to ship it over here, and boom, it was here. Yeah, I fully expected that they were just gonna, yank the football out from under Charlie Brown's feet again and say, nope, sorry, I don't know what happened. It was a computer glitch. We didn't actually find anything, sorry. But no, it actually showed up here, and all of it is here, safe and sound in one piece. And I thought it would show it off because, it's some cool stuff, and it'll be stuff that you'll see on the channel later as I start sort of messing around with it. Okay, so the thing that first got my attention with this little smattering of parts was this digital group stuff. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of the digital group. I've done a documentary on them. I've done lots of reading about them. I have all kinds of their stuff. I pretty much buy anything digital group that I can get my hands on because it is really rare. And the keyboard definitely stuck out as one of the first things that interested me. But the other thing, and the thing that really drew me in, was this board here. This is the 1702 Eprom board, and this board seems to be very, very rare. Digital group systems generally are quite rare, and some of the boards that they produced are like exquisitely rare. And this one, I can't find any documentation on it. I couldn't find anything really among other sites that host digital group stuff, including Brian Blackburn's site, which is pretty exhaustive. So I was definitely excited about that. And the reason that I was not so much for what's on these EPROMs, but the fact that it would enable me to read 1702 EPROMs. If you are a collector like I am and the focus of your collection tends to revolve around the earlier stuff, earlier machines tended to use EPROMs like the 1702, especially if you go earlier than 1976 or so. Most of them will be using 1702s if they have any kind of boot prom or anything. And the problem with 1702s is they were the first EPROM, and they're a little bit different from everything else, and you can't just plug them into a modern Eprom programmer. So this board basically gives me the ability to take an Eprom from a system that I'm working on, say I have a computer that isn't working, and I can kind of figure out, okay, is the code on the Eprom good? Because if it's not, then you're never going to get the computer to work at all. And it's nice also too, because if you can read the EPROMs, you can get some idea as to what the system is supposed to do. And in fact, that's exactly what we did. You might recall I did a video on my MicroKit 816 computer. I can't actually use that computer because I don't have any tapes for it, and I have no way of knowing if it was working, if there was a prompt that should come up when you turn it on. We didn't have any documentation whatsoever. So I thought, okay, well, it'd be really nice to be able to just read the EPROM on it. And I had some help from a fellow named Dave on the VC Fed forum, and we kind of tried a few tricks to see if we could get it to display the EPROM contents, but of course we were missing a lot of stuff. So I got this board and I fixed it up and put it into my digital group machine and took the EPROM out of the MicroKit 816, plugged it in there, and we were able to dump the whole thing and verify that that part of it was working, and no, there's no prompt that you're waiting on. You basically just turn the computer on and then get the tape loading. So yeah, it clarifies a lot of things, and like I said, you can't just plug one of these 1702 EPROMs into a modern programmer because they have all these special voltages on different pins that they use. So yeah, it's just, it's really great to have that. So I'm excited about that one. This is just a 64 character TVC card. So this is basically the video card of a digital group system. I already have two of these, and they both work, but it's always nice to have more extra parts. I've actually tested this one in my digital group system, and it definitely works just fine. So yeah, it's always good to have stuff like that, especially for a rare system. And then this thing is the decorative front panel that they basically put on digital group systems on the chassis that they offered. I don't know, I think they actually had a name for it as a package. I think it was called the Byte Master, and it was basically just the basic digital grip system in a really nice chassis with a really nice keyboard, and everything painted in two-tone brown. And if you've watched my documentary video, this is the thing that sort of helped sink the company, because to make the chassis for these computers, to do any kind of metal work, is really expensive. And they really went over the top. But yeah, the thing that strikes me is just how wide this is. Like, you really have to stretch. Like, that is a big computer. And yeah, so it's nice to have. I have a feeling that the original owner may have upgraded their system like a lot of people did back in the day. When Digital Group went bust and kind of left people sitting high and dry, a lot of them actually took the chassis, which was a perfectly nice piece of gear, and just converted it into an S100 system. And some people just said, okay, well, we'll just, take the Digital Group stuff off. So it's possible that's what happened there. And then this is, that's heavy. This is the Digital Group's keyboard. Now, originally when they sold this, I think there were two different versions. There was one with the number pad and one without. And it was often just sold basically as the PCB and key switches. And the case kind of came later. And there's actually two different versions of the case. There's a much shorter one that covers the one without the keypad, and then there's this one. And I don't know why they have this absurdly large, I don't know, palm rest or whatever on the far right. I don't know why they made it quite this wide. It might be because the system was that wide and, you know, they kind of like the symmetry of that. But yeah, it's massive, it's heavy. I've seen the keyboard actually arranged in two different ways. Like I've seen it kind of crunched over to this side and I've seen it crunched over to that side. So there may be a logic to this for whatever reason. The keyboard itself is pretty nice to type on. It's kind of like a Keytronic type thing. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually is a Keytronic. It looks like they're key tops. This is the shift lock. UC is uppercase, and it looks like it's, I guess it's IC controlled or something. And yeah, and then we flip it over. That's the bottom, and then that's the back. And yeah, we've got this really long cable. Oh, these hobbyist guys and their really long ribbon cables. I guess they're just worried about not having enough leash. And then it comes to this connector, and this connector is actually the digital grip connector. This blade basically plugs into a slot on the back of a digital grip machine. And then you have this adapter that he's made, and it goes to a connector like this. I think that's a 15 pin. And I think that goes with the little steel box that I showed earlier, which I'll show again in a little more detail. So yeah, just some nice pieces of digital grip history. These keyboards do not come up very often. Digital grip stuff generally doesn't come up very often. In terms of production numbers, I've heard fewer than 3,000 digital grip systems were built. So yeah, not a lot out there to start with, and even fewer with attrition and, you know, people scrapping them or changing them to something more relevant after digital grip went under. So yeah, that's great to have. All right, so this next piece should be pretty obvious what it is, as it says so right on the front. This is a 1702 Eprom Programmer that was built basically from scratch, presumably by the owner. I mentioned that this was basically from an estate sale, and the estate sailor said that the guy that had all this stuff was an engineer. So yeah, it definitely looks like the handiwork of an engineer for sure. This is all nice and neatly laid out, and it's got this nice metal casework. You get your transformers. It's basically a breadboard with wire wrap. Yeah, just really nicely done. This is on the back. This is just old school power connectors. And then this here is the connector that you use, I presume, to connect to whatever it is you're going to program with. And like I said, I was on kind of a mission to find ways of reading and writing 1702 EPROMs, just because I have so many older vintage computers that use those as, you know, basically their means of booting up a bootstrap loader. So I wasn't really aiming specifically at this. Obviously I was looking at the digital group stuff and the other piece in the lot there, but I thought it was kind of a neat thing to look at. Obviously, if you wanted to use this, you'd need way more information. You need to know how the cable was wired and what it was connected to, and how exactly you programmed with it. I have no idea how that all worked. But yeah, it's a neat looking piece anyway, and I'm glad to have it here to look at. Yeah, prior to getting my hands on this programmer and another programmer that I bought, and then the card for the digital grip system, I had actually been thinking of building an EPROM programmer for 1702. There's actually been some interest in it recently, and there was a fellow that came up with a design that he posted online, basically using wire wrap. And then there was another fellow that took that design and put it to a PCB, and I actually bought one of those PCBs. intending to build it, but never got around to it. I was a little bit intimidated by it because the complexity of it is a little bit more than what I'm used to. So yeah, I was kind of definitely happy to come across stuff like this. Obviously I can't really use this one, but potentially I can use the other one I got, since it was built for a specific computer system that I have. And of course I can read EPROMs now, which is really the bigger issue. Just being able to read and verify that they're still working after all these years is really useful. The next item I have here is this printer. Now, I generally don't collect printers. I don't collect a lot of peripherals, and the reason is simply because of the amount of space, and especially printers, because printers really only have one purpose in life, and if you don't have a specific need for it, it just takes up space, unfortunately. But, you know, I was forced to make an exception here because it came as part of the lot. And actually, when I looked at it closely and saw what it was, I was actually really glad I got it, because it's kind of unusual. It looks kind of like just a garden variety printer when you look at it, but it's actually something a little different underneath. Lift that off. This is a Teleprinter printer. Yeah, you can see the name here, Expandor Incorporated Model 123P. I did a little bit of research and I learned that this is actually a product that was developed by a different company and then adapted by Expandor for use as a ASCII computer printer. The company that actually made this, you might be able to see the name just down below there, is Mite. Mite was a fairly well-regarded teletype equipment maker, and this was basically a receive-only unit of the type that you would have, you know, somewhere where people needed to receive things like weather reports or news or stuff like that. And this one was fairly popular because it's so small and compact compared to the size a teleprinter normally is. So yeah, Expandor basically took the Mite 123P teleprinter mechanism and then added a PCB on the bottom here that basically adapts it for 8-bit parallel ASCII input, which is fantastic. It's so Rube Goldbergian looking. You've got the ribbon going all the way around over here. Now, this printing mechanism initially kind of confused me because what I'm used to seeing is the big rubber roller. I think it's called a platen. And basically you have your print head and your hammer, or they're both one unit, on one side of the paper, and they basically smash the ribbon against the paper and leave an imprint of the character there. On this printer, it's a little different. The paper comes up in between the ribbon and the print head. So I thought that was kind of weird because it seemed like it would be really flimsy and prone to smearing ink everywhere, but apparently not. So essentially what happens is the paper comes down through here and then up in between the print head and the ribbon. And when the character is to be struck, the print head smashes into the paper and then hits the print head, which is on the other side, and that leaves an impression on this side. So it's kind of a cool mechanism, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to trying to get it running. I think it'd be really neat. It looks pretty clean. Probably will need a good oiling, but other than that, yeah, it seems very, very simple. One thing that's a little weird, this is the ground connector coming from the AC cord there. I don't know if it's supposed to sit out in the open like that or if it was meant to attach to something. I did plug it in briefly just to see what it did. It didn't really do anything. There was no buzzing, no humming, none of the noises my Model 33 over there makes. So I don't know how it works per se, and I did go looking for a manual, but there just isn't one. This printer seems to have been used by a fair number of TRS 80 Model 1 users. For some reason it was recommended to them and showed up in a number of newsletters. Apart from that, I don't know where else it was commonly used. And like I said, there's no documentation anywhere. I actually reached out to the company because the company that made it still exists. Expandor became Blackbox, and Blackbox is still around with us. But most of the people working there are younger than this printer, and they had no idea what I was talking about. So yeah, it looks like it basically just has an edge connector on the back here. So you would have to figure out what the pin out for that is, and then how to activate it. There's no power switch or anything that I can see. It's got this little thing for rotating paper. The paper, by the way, is basically tractor feed. So it's kind of hard for the camera to get it, but there's basically little teeth in there that pull the paper through. But yeah, that is the kind of thing I would collect and keep around, because it's just so esoteric and unusual compared to ordinary dot matrix printers. This is something a little bit special, so really happy to have that. And yeah, this printer retailed, I think, for around $340, $400, somewhere in there, which wasn't cheap, but it was preferable to a dot matrix printer of the era, which would have cost probably 3 times that amount and weighed 150 plus pounds. So yeah, I think you'd be pretty glad to have something small like this. And now we come to the pièce de résistance, which is something I was really excited about when I saw it. This appears to be a Homebrew Terminal. It could be a terminal, it could be a computer. I think it's most likely a terminal. There's a few reasons why. One is this single switch here marked local and line. That's kind of a giveaway that it's a terminal. It does have a lot of the functionality of a computer. You got what looks like a reset and interrupt button there, and a power switch. And then on the back side, we've got some ports. This is that 15-pin connector I was talking about earlier with the digital group system. I think that's what that keyboard had been adapted to use. And then this probably is a parallel printer port, would be my guess. So probably interfaced with that Expandor printer I showed earlier. This is the video output, obviously. And we've got a regulator on the side here for the power supply inside. And we can open it up just like that. Again, it's got this really nice metalwork here. It just looks really cool. And I love homebrew stuff like this, because every piece is a prototype. They're all unique. And often there's a mystery to be solved in terms of figuring out what it is and how it works. And it's just so much fun to do that. So in here, we can see we've got a power supply over here. And then we've got this board, which is kind of interesting. It's got machined sockets, but on the other side, it's kind of hard to see on camera there. It's got pins for wire wrap. So it's kind of a combination of the two things. So these chips can be lifted in and out easily for servicing. And yeah, I mean, it could be either thing, really. I mean, it's got an 8085 processor. It's got an Eprom. There's a character generator over here, a 2513. And it's got all the serial input and output circuitry. It's got, looks like 2 kilobytes of RAM. Yeah, I mean, it's got the smarts to be a computer, but I do believe it is a TV typewriter or terminal type thing. And the reason is because the box that it came in was marked glass teletype. And I don't think that your average estate seller would know that term. Maybe they might have looked it up, but even then, to most estate sellers, this would look more like a computer probably than a glass teletype. Glass teletype is kind of old terminology for a CRT-based terminal. So yeah, I think probably this was boxed by the original owner, and I think they were clearly indicating what it was. And again, with this local and line switch and everything else, it sort of lines up. Yeah, so there we have it, a nice little smattering of interesting vintage computer gear. Yeah, I think the original owner probably started off as a digital group customer. I think it would be unlikely that they would just have this bezel hanging around. I think they probably had the full computer system at one point, along with the keyboard and these cards. And I suspect what happened is what happened to a lot of digital group people. Either they found the system a little bit too confining because it was such a proprietary bus design, or they basically had no other choice when digital group went bankrupt and kind of left everybody high and dry. They just said, you know, we got to change to a system that's more compatible. And I have encountered a few machines like that where you've got an original digital group chassis, but they've basically removed all the guts and subbed in S100 gear. And a lot of S100 computers back in the day typically needed a terminal in order to be able to communicate. So I think that's probably the story here. I think all this stuff probably was together. You probably could program 1702s and communicate with an S100 computer that sadly was lost somewhere in time, and print stuff out on this printer. The EPROMs on this card, some of them are marked CPM, so I have a feeling he was probably trying to run CPM on the digital group system and finding it lacking in some way, and that might have been another thing that spurred him on to upgrade. So yeah, I'm glad he kept all this stuff though. I'm glad I have it, and you definitely will see in a future video attempts to get most of it working. The 1702 programmer, unfortunately, there's too many variables there. There's no way for me to know how to make that work. I've already made the card work. I know that that's working now. I know the TVC 64 card is working, but I would love to get this guy up and running and see what it does. And hopefully I can learn a bit more about these printers. I don't know if there's anybody out there that's ever messed with a Mite Teleprinter or an Expandor 123 printer. If you have, back in the day, if you were a TRS-80 Model 1 user maybe that took a flyer on one of those, definitely give me a buzz, and for sure we'll try and see if we can figure out how to get it going again. Anyway, again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.